The head nurse sneered. "This is a hospital, not a soup kitchen," as she poured the contents of the thermos into the sink. The hot liquid hissed as it hit the cold steel, a venomous sound in the deadly quiet of the utility room, echoing like a serpent's breath. Arthur's stoic silence in that moment was the quiet before the storm, because what was just poured down the drain wasn't merely soup, it was a direct insult to the very founder of this hospital. Arthur Miller moved through the halls of St. R., Jude's Central Hospital, like a shadow. At 68 years old, he was a retired firefighter who had spent the last 20 years of his life fighting not blazes, but the invisible microbes on the hospital floors. To most, he was just the old man who wiped the floors and pushed the rolling trash bin. But for Arthur, this hospital was more than a workplace. It was the place where his beloved wife, Clara, had taken her last breath 6 years ago. Since that day, Arthur couldn't bring himself to leave the building. Staying here was both a memorial and a silent vow. He wasn't just cleaning floors. He imagined he was wiping away the pain of the patients, the anxieties of the families, and the fatigue of the doctors. He was the silent guardian of this hospital. Unlike the other staff, Arthur knew the stories of the people inside the rooms, not just their numbers. He saw the new mother in 402 smile at her baby for the first time. He quietly placed the family photo the old man in 215 had dropped back on his bedside table. He was the keeper of the small details no one else noticed. And then there was Rumo. 303. The man in that room was a legend, but a terrible one. Mr. Gable. From the first day he was admitted, he had made everyone's life a misery. He yelled at the nurses, mocked the doctor's diagnoses, and sent back every hospital meal without taking a single bite. He was said to be wealthy, yet he had no visitors, no one who called to check on him. To everyone, he was a cantankerous, lonely old man just waiting to die. The staff would practically tiptoe past his door, but Arthur saw something else beneath Mr. Gable's hardened shell. He felt the profound grief behind his anger, the fear behind his shouting, and the crushing loneliness. One night, while cleaning Gable's room, he heard the old man muttering in his sleep, "Not like my mother's soup. None of it is—" Those few words pierced Arthur's heart like an arrow, because his own wife, Clara, had said the same thing in her final days. But you won't believe this. That night Arthur made a decision. The next day he took Clara's old recipe book down from a dusty shelf at home. He found the page titled Healing, Chicken Broth. That evening he brought a small thermos with him to the hospital. This was more than just a kind gesture. This was a balm for Gable's soul and for his own wounded heart. It was a way of keeping his wife's memory alive. Arthur slipped into room 303 silently, long after midnight, when the halls were empty. Gable was sitting up in bed, staring out the window into the darkness. "You again?" he growled. "Get the hell out of my sight." Arthur said nothing. He simply poured the steaming soup from the thermos into a bowl, placed it on the bedside table, and left the room as quietly as he entered. When he returned half an hour later, the bowl was empty. For a man who hadn't touched hospital food in weeks, this was a miracle. This became their ritual. Every night Arthur would arrive with a different soup from Clara's recipe book, and every night an empty bowl would be waiting for him. Gable was still gruff, still silent. But when Arthur entered the room, a flicker of light would appear in his eyes for a brief moment. It was a kind of silent understanding, but this small act of mercy would not go unnoticed in the hospital's cold, sterile corridors. Head nurse Helen Mitchell was a soldier of policy, a woman who valued efficiency above human life. To her, patients were statistics to be cured, and janitors were invisible pawns. She had noticed Arthur's unauthorized nightly visits to room 303. She saw it as a waste of time and a flagrant violation of hospital policy. One night, she was waiting for Arthur in the hallway as he left the room. Her face was like a storm cloud. "What is in that thermos, Arthur?" she asked, her voice like ice. "Just soup, ma'am," he said. Helen's eyes narrowed. "You will stop feeding that patient," she hissed. "One more violation, and you're fired. Understood?" Arthur simply nodded, but he couldn't sleep that night. He knew Gable was waiting for him with an empty bowl. He was caught between his conscience and his job. In the end, his conscience won. He hadn't seen the biggest surprise yet. The following night, as he was walking down the hall with his thermos, he was intercepted by Helen in front of the utility room. "What did you think I said?" she demanded, snatching the thermos from his hand. Arthur tried to say something, but Helen wouldn't listen. She opened the door to the utility room and walked straight to the large steel sink. "This is a hospital, not a soup kitchen, and certainly not a dumpster," she declared, opening the thermos and pouring the fragrant, steaming soup down the drain. Arthur's face showed no anger, no hatred, just a deep, profound disappointment. He lowered his head, turned, took his mop cart, and walked silently away down the corridor. The next morning, the hospital was buzzing with unusual activity. Men in the black suits with serious faces were walking the halls. A delegation, including the board of directors and some of the city's most important figures, had arrived for a surprise inspection. Everyone was on edge, especially head nurse Helen. She was trying to look perfect, and it was at this exact moment that everything changed. As the hospital's CEO, Mr. Peterson, was giving the delegation a tour, the group suddenly turned towards the third floor and stopped directly in front of room 303. Helen's heart tightened. Why that troublesome, grumpy patient's room? One of the men in suits knocked and entered. The CEO turned to Helen. "Nurse Mitchell, how is Mr. Gable's condition? How was his nutrition last night?" Helen saw an opportunity to impress. With an arrogant smile, she said, "Don't worry, sir. Everything is under control. In fact, last night, I personally prevented a potential health hazard by disposing of some unauthorized and unhygienic soup brought in by a janitor." The CEO's smile froze on his face. His color drained, leaving him pale as a sheet. You did what?" But the real shock was yet to come. A weak but authoritative voice called out from inside the room. "Peterson, tell that woman to find Arthur, and I want the exact same soup he brought me." Everyone in the hall froze. The CEO turned to Helen, his voice trembling. "Ma'am," he said, "the man you just insulted, whose unhygienic soup you poured down the drain, is Dr. Alistair Gable, the legendary surgeon who founded this very hospital 30 years ago. He was spending his final days here under an assumed name to see how his creation was being run, and that soup was the only thing he had eaten in weeks." Helen's world collapsed. Her career, her reputation, everything, it had all gone down the drain with that soup. Later that day, Arthur, expecting to be fired, was summoned to the CEO's office. There, he found Mr. Gable sitting in a wheelchair. The old man's eyes were moist. "That soup," he whispered, "it reminded me of my mother. It reminded me that I was human." Arthur was not fired. By Dr. Gable's personal order, he was promoted to a new position never before seen in the hospital: Director of Patient Comfort and Humanity. His job was to ensure that every patient's spiritual needs, not just their medical ones, were met. Dr. C. Gable passed away peacefully a few weeks later, but he had one last surprise in his will. He left a multi-million-dollar donation to St. Jude's Central Hospital, establishing a new fund to be used for small but meaningful acts of kindness that would soothe the souls of patients, Arthur's Healing Soup Fund. Arthur always knew he was more than a janitor. He was a healer, and his story reminded the world that true healing is sometimes found not in a scalpel or a pill, but in a bowl of warm soup and the compassionate heart that offers it. Kindness and merit are recorded even when they go unnoticed. To continue hearing stories that prove it, don't forget to follow the Merit Ledger and leave a comment about a time when a small act of kindness made a huge difference. Because every life is a record worth reading.